Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So welcome everybody to Tuesday meditation. And today the temperature has precipitously dropped. Although yesterday and the last 2 days were very summer-like. So when you come to meditation, you also get a weather report. So on Sunday, headed down to Unity Wesak, which is a yearly event organized by Bhante Saranapala, the urban Buddhist monk, and he brings together, I think, almost all of the temples in the GTA. So I think there's like 29 temples. I didn't actually know there was that many Buddhist temples, but it's a lot. There's a lot of temples there. So it's all the Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana monks. And so it's kind of a unique event. Actually, one of the Chinese monks there one time said to me that he'd never seen an event like this anywhere in the world. And Canada is kind of unique because everybody's here. It's almost every type of restaurant in Canada, in Toronto. You can go to restaurants from all over the world. It's a couple blocks away. There's almost every type of religion. Almost every type of people from every type of nationality are here. And so the three main schools of Buddhism are here. And there's a lot of people in each of those schools here, living here. It's not really a kind of huge domination of Theravada, a huge domination of Mahayana, or a huge domination of Vajrayana. And these schools have been separate for quite some time. People have trouble classifying these different things. Some people call them schools, some people call them different Buddhist religions. And basically at one time, all Buddhism came from the Buddha in India, 2,500 years ago. And he taught, and what we have in the suttas, basically. And he taught these things and the monks carried them around in their minds for quite a long time. And he predicted that 500 years after his passing, that the Dhamma would only last, what they call the Saddhamma, would only last for 500 years. And this basically means the Dhamma, his teachings, not adulterated with any other teachings. And the non-Saddhamma is what he called Saddhamma Patirupa, which, as far as I remember it, and maybe there's somebody online who will post a comment and say, but that's what I remember. And the meaning of this is actually not just false Dhamma. What it means is complicated Dhamma. And one of the meanings, kind of the false Dhamma is complicated. So this kind of false Dhamma that comes up looks and sounds like the real Dhamma, but it's complicated. When you read the suttas, it seems like very, very simple. Okay, it's like almost elementary. And then, but actually, it's not too elementary. Kind of, some of the concepts, the way the Buddha lays it out, are very clear. And so about 500 years, amazingly, after the Buddha's passing, there started to be these schisms in the Buddhist Sangha. These kind of, actually, I think there might have been even a couple before that. And basically, monks started to kind of argue a lot over doctrinal points in Buddhism. So there's some things that the Buddha didn't really talk about, didn't really address. And then there became these fissures in the various Buddhist schools. And they all developed what they call an Abbe Dumbas. Originally there were these kind of lists that were called matikas. And they were like headings for each of the Dhammas, like they were summaries almost of certain concepts in Buddhism. And these lists eventually by these various schools got developed into what's now the Abbe Dumbas. My understanding. So there was at one time 18 schools in this, what we call the Theravada, kind of 18 different Abbe Dumbas. And they would argue over these philosophical concepts that the Buddha tended to put aside. There was some like on the nature. A lot of it was on the nature of self. So one school said there were the Pugalavadins. They said there's actually this subtle self. Another one was called the Sarvastavadins, and they were all about how actually, we think that they called them Dhammas. They had this idea of the smallest elements that make up reality. And so these kind of Dhammas are eternal, and they don't change. Yeah? Then there were a bunch of different, we've lost actually a lot of them, so we maybe don't know exactly what some of them taught because Buddhism was wiped out of India. And then in addition to this, there was also schools of Buddhism that came up with kind of new sutras, they called them. They started to use the Sanskrit language. And this was the original Buddhist language, was what called Magadhi, kind of Pali language. And these new sutras were written in this Sanskrit language. And it's kind of this was the basis of the Mahayana, what we now call Mahayana Buddhism. So they started with like all these sutras, and actually I started in Mahayana Buddhism, so you can read these, and these have a different take, a different what you might call spin on Buddhism. They introduced this concept of the Bodhisattva. I won't go into all the differences between the different Buddhist schools, but they introduced these other concepts, kind of came up with new sutras. And they originally lived side by side, like there was no real distinction between Theravada and Mahayana. I mean, there was in terms of the concepts, but it'd be like if all the different monks at this monastery or this temple, half of them started to develop new ideas about the sutras, like a new exegesis. They all live in the same temple, But what eventually happened was, and there was another thing that happened, there was this big university that got established called Nalanda University. It's kind of the huge university. And this is where I think a lot of these ideas really started to get developed. And then there was this other type of Buddhism that arose there, which is what they called the Mantrayana. So the Buddha originally kind of didn't have much to say about psychic powers that were, he allowed them, but this Mantrayana put a lot of emphasis on psychic powers, and started to put a lot of emphasis on what we might call Antinomian practices. This kind of antinomian means, okay, if somebody says this thing is pure, okay, don't break the precepts, then we show that we're actually even more pure than that. We're beyond dualities by breaking almost all the things that we think are pure. So this is what antinomian means. And this was one of the hallmarks, what they called this Mantrayana. It's kind of Mantrayana. So there's these three, what you might call broad spectrum changes that occurred in Buddhism in India. And then there was an invasion that happened from the Turks, I think, kind of a Muslim. When the Muslim religion first arose, it kind of spread all over the world, mainly through conquest, and basically conquered all these Buddhist countries that were in the top part of Asia, Afghanistan, along the trade routes, and then conquered all of India. So Buddhism basically got wiped out of its homeland and in the central area, mainly through conquest. And so when it was wiped out, it had already spread to China, to Tibet, and to Sri Lanka. And so after it had been wiped out, the Muslim leaders, India was a Muslim country for quite some time, and also a very strong Hindu country. And so between those two religions, Buddhism could not return to India for 1,000 years. And so for 1,000 years, until the British and until the European powers kind of conquered most of the world and basically reunited some of these countries through their conquest in some ways, these roots were opened again, and these schools of Buddhism met again, post-colonially. But for about 1,000 years, possibly, they were separate. And so with these three separations, these different types of Buddhism evolves along the cultural lines of the places where they were. So Tibetan Buddhism, you might say, is very culturally different than Sri Lankan Buddhism. It's very kind of Tibetan. Kind of very much based on, based on Tibetan culture. The Buddha didn't really lay down a lot of what they call Amisa Puja practices, these kind of practices on how you do like a ritual, like how you should offer flowers or these kind of things. He didn't lay specific rules about that. His teaching was more doctrinal. So whenever Buddhism comes to a new culture, it tends to have a different emphasis, especially in these areas. But there was also this additional emphasis because each of these three types of Buddhism had different doctrines based on their evolutions in India. The second type, which is called, actually I should have listed this one first, the Mahayana went to China. And from China, through various circumstances, the type of Buddhism that became dominant there is called Chan. Actually, I think there was a war, and what happened was Chan Buddhist monks, now it's called Zen. Chan Buddhist monks could grow food themselves. So they lived in the mountains, they practiced meditation, and they grew food. So they survived the war, is my understanding. Somebody might... and after that, they became a very predominant type of Buddhism in China. So now, what we have as the Mahayana is very heavily influenced by Zen. After it went from China, it went to Korea and became Son Buddhism. And from Korea, it went to Japan and became Zen. Chon to Son to Zen. So this is what we now have as the Mahayana, more or less. It's heavily represented, although not exclusively so, by Zen. And then the third type of Buddhism went south. This was based on the school of what they called the Saviras. Savira means elders. And the Abbe Dumbas of this school was opposed to the Pugalavadins. The Pugalavadins were these people who thought that there was this self, hidden self. And so this school was called the Vajrayana. And the Vajrayana are what Theravadins are now today. It's kind of Stavira means elder, Thera is Pali for elder. So Theravada means the school of the elders. And this went south to Sri Lanka. And we are not too sure when it was in Thailand. It might have been in Thailand before, Thailand and Burma. But in any event, it's all in that area. And so except for a little bit of contact in Vietnam, maybe where there's kind of like a mixture between Theravada and Mahayana, these schools were largely separated for quite some time. So it's very unique that now all these three schools of Buddhism, three types of Buddhism have met here again in large numbers in Canada. And so Bhante organizes to have them all together on a single stage. And so there are doctrinal differences between these types of Buddhism. Okay? There are philosophical differences, there are differences in practices, and large differences in what you might call views about the purpose of Buddhist practice, about what its end is, about the nature of an arahant. So these things are actually serious doctrinal issues. But one of the nice things about Buddhism is that it focuses, of course, on these doctrinal issues. It's important. The first element of the path is called right view. Because if we have a map, and one map says go left, another map says go right, another map says go straight, they're all going different places. You know what I mean? But at the same time, Buddhism is an individual practice. And so there's actually no need to go converting other people to our view. And we kind of take care of ourselves, we take care of other people. And there's a gradation of principles there. So actually there's a gradation of principles that are shared by all religions, basically. All the great religions say do good, don't do bad. All the various schools of Buddhism have even more in common than that, because almost all of them have their basis in the Pali Canon. In fact, the Mahayana explicitly looks to the Pali Canon. They call it, and also the Tibetans a little less so, because theirs was a little bit later one, but all of them have these roots in the Pali Canon. All of them take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And if you go to India, to the Buddha's birthplace, they're all there. So one of the things that the Buddha said, there was actually this time when, towards the end of his life, he was getting old, and his cousin tried to split the Sangha, tried to split his following and become like the king of the Sangha. And he tried to do this in a lot of interesting ways. He tried a couple times, I think. And first he tried to kill the Buddha in a lot of different ways, and that didn't work out. So if we think, nowadays you see some problems in the Sangha, all of them at the time of the Buddha were much worse. Almost the worst things you could imagine happened then. And they happened to the Buddha, and he had to deal with them. But his cousin tried to split the Sangha in all these various ways, and kind of tried to say, okay, I'm more hardcore, all monks should be vegetarian, all monks should live at the root of a tree, all these different things. And the Buddha said, no, monks can eat meat if whatever, monks can eat meat if they don't suspect it's been killed for them. You can live at the root of the tree anytime except for the 3 months of the rains and a bunch of other things. So he refused him. And then his cousin went and said, okay, we're breaking away from the Sangha. Okay, he said, we're going to hold Uposatha Kammas separate from all the other members of the Sangha. Uposatha is when the monks get together for their fortnightly rules. And this is what's called a schism in the Sangha. It's kind of a split in the Sangha. And this is taken so seriously that if a person even suspects that they're causing a schism not in line with the Dhamma, it's said that person goes to hell. There's no way to redeem that person. By the way, there's a lot of ways to redeem people. One of the Buddha's Arahant disciples killed almost 1,000 people, and he still became an Arahant. But if you split the Sangha, then you go to hell. There's no way of redeeming. Also, if you kill your mother, your father, if you shed the blood of a Tathagata, or if you kill an Arahant, then you go to hell. There's no way anybody can save you. So those people can't ordain as monks if you've done any of those things. But in any event, also the reverse is true. If a person unites a divided Sangha, then they go to the Brahma world for an eon. Kind of the eon is this very, very long period of time. It's basically the time that the world takes to get destroyed and then re-evolve. That's how long an eon is. It's basically the length of time that the universe lasts. And so it's said to be so long that if there was a mountain, like I think 20, they call it yojanas. I think a yojana is like 21 kilometers or something like that. Anyways, it's a long way. I can't remember exactly how long a yojana is. I think it's around 20 kilometers. So this is a really high mountain, bigger than Mount Everest. And it said that an eon lasts so long that if a bird were to fly over the top of the mountain with a silk scarf and brush the top with the silk scarf, that by the time the whole mountain was worn to the ground from that effort, an eon still wouldn't have passed. Kind of the length that a universe lasts is that long. So if you split a Sangha, you go to hell for an eon. There's no redeeming you. If you unite a divided Sangha, you go to heaven for an eon. You generate. So it's taken that seriously, the unity of the Buddhist Sangha. So this particular event was called Unity Wesak. And I remember the first time I went to this event, there was this halo around the sun. It's kind of this big halo. And when I was in Thailand, there was this very famous monk who passed away. He was actually a Westerner. He didn't pass away when I was there, but they had a video of his funeral. And at his funeral, there was this halo around the sun. That was the only other time I'd ever seen this halo. They actually have photos of this. It was in 2017 here, if you take a look. What? Oh, was there? Yeah. Okay. Well, I know in 2017 it was this big one. And in Thailand, when this happened with this monk, it was seen as something very auspicious. So this was actually, I think, that monk was rumored to be an Arahant. And that was the only time I'd ever heard of that happening. And then I came here in 2017 at this Unity Wesak, and there was this halo around the sun. A kind of very unique event. One of the only places where monks and nuns from these three traditions stand together on a single stage, stand together with this attitude of harmony. And so this attitude of harmony, this attitude of getting along, although it doesn't take complete precedence in Buddhism, this is an important principle. So oftentimes, especially in the West, I've had people approach me, and sometimes at least, and then we get to talking, oh yeah, so you're a Buddhist monk, oh yeah, religion is poison. Or kind of people, a lot of people in the West think that religion is like a poison. And one of the reasons is because classically, religion has led to wars, and sometimes terrible wars. Wars that involve people committing horrible atrocities that later get covered up by the religious authorities. And historically, people go back and look at them, and they're like, what's going on with this? And these atrocities have traditionally, or actually often in Western history at least, not everywhere, they've been committed in the name of views, especially in Western history. I don't know so much about Eastern religious conflicts, but often these kind of atrocities get committed in the name of views. These kind of wars happen as a result of views. Okay, what do you believe? Do you believe that when the bell gets rung, the wafer literally turns into the body and blood of Jesus? No, I don't believe that. Kind of these dividing lines get cut with these views. And when these views get cut, then people split on either side of the dividing line. And this is actually what happened with Devadatta in the Buddhist Sangha. He established these 5 points and said, if anybody agrees with me, you should come with me. The Buddha's being lax, and he split the Sangha on the basis of a view. And so actually this is the function of a view. This is the function of having a view, and it's an important function. this function of being able to split things is actually what allows us to split ourselves from defilements. That's why there's this phrase when I was learning Pali with Bhante Ratanasir, there's this phrase called panya chindati, which means wisdom cuts. Wisdom, this aspect of discernment discerns between what's good and what's bad. It splits it. And the function of discernment is to come up with these views, to come up with a worldview, with a map of practice that allows people to split themselves from what's good and what's bad. And so these worldviews get developed into religions, and these religions have various views. But the interesting thing about the Buddha's approach to this is that whenever there's a conflict in the monastic sangha, he says, okay, take a look about what's on the side of the Dhamma. And if there's a split, then you have to form an opinion about who's actually right and who's actually wrong. But at the same time, there is this thing, if you desire to split the sangha, even if you suspect that you're wrong, then you go to hell if you're successful. So what this led to is a kind of a middle path approach for most of what the Buddha recommends in Buddhist practice. On the one hand, we develop our own wisdom. So I joined the Theravada order of monks for a reason. I'm a Theravada monk for very specific reasons. And kind of examined various religious philosophies, examined the philosophies of the different Buddhist schools, and chose Theravada, knowing the differences between them, or on whatever level I read, and having practiced in Mahayana, I thought that this was the best expression of the Buddha's teachings. However, the Buddha's teachings always have nuances to them. Because when I was in Mahayana, I heard about monks there who I thought were arahants. So what this means is that although you might feel that this way is the correct way, doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who's on this other school, this other religion, this other path, that what they're doing is wrong. What they're doing is improper. So what it means is that it's possible to stand together on the same stage with people of a different view. To stand together on the same stage with people of a different religion. To stand together on the same stage with people from different races, different nationalities, different genders, with the thought that all of this is for the sake of unity in doing what's good. Because this is the most common and basic element that unites all religious philosophies. Yes, there are differences between them, and we should know what those are. And we should make informed choices about them. But there's a nuance to it. Just because I've chosen this particular path, having examined, doesn't mean that I'm more spiritually advanced than somebody over there. For all I know, they could be what's called a bodhisattva. In the future, they could become a Buddha. And for all I know, in another 5 years, I might end up disrobing for some reason. I don't know. I'm not planning to do that, but you never know. Right? You can't get conceited about these things. So what this means is that when it comes to views about religion, we take them as a view. We examine them in terms of a view, like a map, and we choose the map that we think is best. But when it comes to people, we don't classify them in the same way. We don't box them in according to their view. We don't try to evaluate them necessarily as being somebody who's like evil in comparison to us, as being somebody who's great in comparison to us. When we look at people, we evaluate them in terms of the qualities that we want to emulate in them. We evaluate them in terms of the qualities that we might want to avoid in them. But we don't evaluate them as a finished product. And so what this means is that wherever there are people who value goodness, there can be harmony among these people. Wherever there are people who value avoiding bad things and doing good things, this is a basis for peace. This is a basis for ease. And this is something that brings a lot of joy in making an effort to have harmony with people of different views, of different persuasions, to say nothing of people of the same view and the same persuasion. So this is why the Buddha had this phrase, the Pali I can't remember, I think it's called Samma Sukhasa Samagi. It's kind of or Sangha Sukhasa Samagi. which means harmony among the Sangha is happiness. I might have elements of that wrong. I'm not always the best at quoting, but get the point, right? So on leaving this kind of event, kind of this Unity Wesak, I had this kind of huge feeling of like happiness, for having had the opportunity to participate, basically with the intention of having this harmony, kind of among the members of the Sangha. Because wherever we develop this intention, whether it's in the family, people's families, all people have different views, whether it's in the workplace, people in their workplace have all different views, if it's in a country, if it's in the world, if people individually develop this attitude of harmony, then they gain happiness from that attitude of harmony. And it doesn't mean they have to give up what they feel is the right map. What it means is that they look to other people to find this commonality in doing good deeds, this commonality in avoiding bad deeds, and this is a commonality that's very important, that can lead to peace within an individual. If it's practiced in Toronto, leads to peace in Toronto, and if it's practiced in the world, it leads to peace in the world. That's why Sangha Sukhasa Samagi. Harmony in the Sangha is happiness.